Hi there, I'm Michael Bovee with Consumer Recovery Network. Thanks for tuning in to DebtBytes, our YouTube channel where we cover all things debt and credit. Today I'm going to do this massive topic and condense it into as short as possible of kind of some bullet points. And it encompasses timing. When and why it is time to settle your debts. So let's start. You have to be late enough in order to get the best savings outcome. Okay, so what does this mean? Timing is everything when you settle a debt. If you try and call your creditor after you just missed a payment with them and you're not even a week to even 2 months behind, they're not going to have a very productive conversation with you about settling for the best savings. And you want the best savings. If you're going to go through the process of settling debt, or you're watching this video and you already haven't paid, damage is already done to your credit, there's really no benefit to backing all of that out and paying top dollar, so obviously you want to try and save the most. The fact of the matter is you didn't pay because you didn't have any money, and unless you just won the lottery, you need the savings because you can't afford your bills. So timing when you're negotiating a debt means typically you're behind at least 90 days. Don't even bother having a negotiation conversation with anybody unless you're like 90 days behind or more. And actually, it's more often that you need to be 6 months behind before you're reaching the optimum time to negotiate and get the best outcome. Let's go to number 2. Time until your account is placed with outside debt collectors. Guess what? There's a shelf life to how long your creditors will often try and hold on and collect with their own internal resources. What most credit card banks do is they wait to assign your account out until after that 90-day mark. With some major national issuers right now, we're seeing more and more of them do some early placements. A contingency debt collector is just going to try and get you to pay through phone calls and writing you letters. They're the most common type of debt collector in the country, and we cover them in many different videos on our YouTube channel and a lot of articles on the CRN site. But when they get these accounts is often the best time to settle some of your debt. Some of your creditors send them out early. You'll have some earlier opportunities, but by and large, again, here we're talking about 6 months before most of the time you're going to hear from an outside third-party debt collector. And do not be afraid of the debt collector. It is actually where many of the most dynamic results, depending on who your creditors are, is going to come from. Let's move on to number 3. Time until you can save up to pay a settlement. Alright, so listen, that's obvious. If you cannot afford to fund a settlement, you need time. And sometimes your time is going to be different than when the time the creditor would accept a settlement, so you absolutely are going to be dealing with outside third-party debt collectors because too much time went by. So you have to calculate what it's going to be like for you from today when you're watching this video and you don't have enough money or can't project when you're going to have enough money to settle with each one of your unpaid debts. So this is really strategic, and I want to help you understand what you're up against when you have to and you need more time to save up money in order to fund your deals, right? Let's move on to number 4. Time a debt collector will have your account. Alright, so listen, debt collection, the most common type I just talked about a moment ago, is a contingency debt collector. This is the debt collector that writes you, phones you, tries to get you to pay. They only make money if they get you to pay. So when they get the debt, they're usually on a time limit. There's a shelf life to a debt collector having your account in a lot of cases. This does not apply to debt buyers. I'm talking about debt collection agencies that either work directly for your creditor or work for that debt buyer, okay? The assignment timelines, these cycles, they change. They can be different when your account is newly unpaid versus, man, your account hasn't been paid in 2-3 years. This collector might have your account for 6 months or longer. Whereas just charged off or newly unpaid debt, a debt collector might have that for a very short window of time. Sometimes you want to take advantage of that short window of time debt collector because you have a better outcome. You don't want it to go somewhere else where you're not sure what the outcome's going to be. Here again, it's going to be very creditor specific, very debt collection agency specific, time specific as far as how long they've had it. Can you get them at the end of the month when they're trying to meet their own internal collection goals? There's a bunch of timing factors around debt settlement. If you haven't figured that out already, I know I'm talking fast, I'm covering a lot of details, but I want to give you an impression that time is both your friend and your enemy when it comes to settling debt. Let's move on to number 5. Time until you're at risk of being sued. Alright, so how quickly you can be sued is going to vary from one person, from one creditor, from one debt collector, from one situation to the next. Let me be clear. The beginning risk of being sued is the moment you stop paying, they can sue. Does that happen in practice? Absolutely not. Traditionally, and we're talking about credit cards, lines of credit, personal loans, things like that, which is most of the marketplace for consumer loans. Traditionally, those lawsuits are going to begin right around the time they charge off the debt, when they expect to never be paid again so that they actually take a loss on it on their books and their accounting. And that's when their collection pipelines for most creditors are going to start to serve a purpose, right? One of those pipelines for many credit card issuers is placing accounts with debt collection attorneys. So the earliest opportunity for that, or risk, fear for that to happen to you, is going to generally be 6 months and beyond. Almost all the time I see that not happen at month 7. For example, it's going to be usually maybe 12 months before the real risk looms large on certain creditors. There's one exception before that 6-month period is going to tend to be Amex accounts. Amex I see be far more aggressive in litigation strategies and placement with their network of collection attorneys earlier sometimes in 6 months. Sometimes you can circumvent that. Sometimes there's things you can do to put yourself in a position to not have to worry about that as early. Sometimes you cannot. Here's the thing, and especially with that creditor, and maybe earlier ones that sue earlier too, is that settlements happen at litigation all day. So do you want that to happen? Heck no, not by any stretch of the imagination. Is it the end of the world? Can you build that expectation and or that potential eventuality into your settlement timing and or strategy overall? Absolutely. So don't avoid it, certainly, and understand that it can happen to you, but typically much further down the road. Debt buyers sue differently. They're not even going to be able to buy your account until after usually the creditor charges it off 6 months late. So the risk of those guys suing, who they sue a lot too. It all gets built into your overall strategical view of settling who with, when, earlier than somebody else. So let's move on. Time until you can no longer be sued. Alright, so listen, this is key. You're on the video you're watching right now, and let's say you live in California, and it's been over 4 years since you last paid on the account that you're concerned about. The statute of limitations to legitimately try and collect from you in the courts in California is 4 years from when you last paid. So if it's been longer than that, a legitimate lawsuit could not be brought. If it were, you could file your defense, answer, and your defense is, hey, this is time barred. It's a slam dunk, right? You don't even see that happen much anymore, out of stat debt being sued upon in the courts, not just in California, but everywhere. Every state has their own statute of limitations to legitimately collect through the courts, right? A lot of states have 4 years. Some states have 3 years. Other states have 6 years. So it can vary from state to state. I can just tell me where you live and what your concerns are along those lines in the comments, and I can answer you specifically about your state. Having said that, if the statute of limitations is expired and you're still looking to negotiate a settlement on your debt, you have great timing because they can't sue. That is something that is taken away from them, that leverage. There are a couple of states, just a small handful, where your dialogue with them or a written offer to settle can restart that statute of limitations, that firm offer, or making a payment, obviously. I recommend that you not send in negotiated offers in writing because you're making that written offer that triggers the SOL to restart in certain states. One, it's completely unproductive to try and negotiate through the mail and through written offers. But two, there's that fear, depending on your state. Don't do it. If you want to settle a debt that is outside the SOL or the statute of limitations in your state, it's probably because you just feel obligated to, and now you've bounced back financially so you can. You're still in a good shape to be negotiating your debt. So talk a little bit more with me about it in the comments, or pick up the phone, hit extension 2, and talk to me some more about the particular situation, why you're trying to settle out of stat debt. Let's move on to number 7. Time to settle and deal with the debt when you are being sued. Alright, here's the problem with being sued, since we're on the topic, right? You're in a formal process, and there are time limitations to what you can do, why you need to do what you do, when you do it, when you're trying to ultimately resolve a debt. Again, I am specifically talking about resolving the debt, not timing to, make your case and get it dismissed because you have good affirmative defenses and things like that. I'm not talking about that strategy. I am talking about, I want to negotiate a settlement and pay a debt and avoid the judgment issue and all of that stuff. But I've been sued. So the formal process has some time limitations. One, once you're served, you have a short period of time, as little as 20 days or 30 days, to file an answer to the complaint. That's a formal thing that has to be done. It's a time limitation. If you do not meet that time limitation, you end up with a default judgment. Or you file your answer and then there's time for you to navigate the formal court process in order to buy yourself even more time to save up money so that you can offer a realistic lump sum settlement to avoid the judgment. So there's some very timing specific things involved with while you're engaged in the court process. So be careful of missing any of those and strategically plan for what's realistic in that whole process. We can talk a little bit more about that on the phone. Give me a call. I can refer you to some resources as well. Let's move on to number 8. Time to settle a debt once you already have a judgment. Here's the end of the life cycle of a debt, right? So you didn't pay for how much time, and you dealt with debt collectors and couldn't pay for how much time, and then you got sued and now there's a judgment against you, and you're going to have to deal with that sometimes until the end of time. And here's what I mean. Judgments are part of the court record, and they're there forever, and they can be renewed. Most debts have a shelf life. We talked about the statute of limitations in order to legitimately file a suit, and that can pass. Once there's a judgment entered in the court, it has a shelf life. A lot of the times that shelf life is around 10 years, but it can be renewed. It gets a whole new set of downs. The plaintiff, the judgment creditor, as long as they do it typically within 90 days before the expiration, 10-year expiration of when that judgment went in, they get a whole new 10 years. It's varied by state, right? So some judgments are good for 20 years, some are good for a little less than 10 years, but can be renewed, and some can be only renewed a few times, and then some can be renewed forever. In other words, the judgment isn't going away anytime soon. So there is a time that you want to resolve this and not let it carry on for too long, because judgment is charged interest. The court gets to set an interest. Usually it's capped at the state level. There are a few states, unfortunately, that allow judgment interest at the contract rate, which is just ginormous. But these balances are growing. They're not going anywhere. They're enforceable in ways that you don't want to have to deal with, depending on your state. Again, garnishment, bank levy, property liens. To prevent all that, or to prevent this from growing too much, you want to time your efforts and settle judgments. Judgments do settle. They're not impossible to negotiate. There are a whole bunch of things that go into how you can be successful in negotiating a settlement at a much more reduced amount versus somebody who looks a hell of a lot more collectible and is not going to be able to shave much off that balance when they negotiate it. You can make payments on judgments. There's different things that you can do to resolve it. Again, it's a timing effect that the longer the judgment has been there unpaid, sometimes the more negotiable the outcome is. The fresher the judgment, the newer it is, sometimes they're going to hold out and hold out for more money from you when you start to try and negotiate them. But again, a very specific subset of situations or circumstances can lead to success or failure negotiating settlements when there's already a judgment. Another reason to pick up the phone and talk to somebody about your particulars and get your bearings straight. This is not all that there is to do about timing and settling your debt. There is a lot more to it, but these are the basics. I wanted to hit all of these different highline items and give a little bit of dialogue towards it so that you know that no matter where you're at in the life cycle of a debt, you just stop paying your payments 3 days late versus all the way to the end of that cycle and you got a judgment, or you never got sued and it's off your credit report and you're still trying to do something about it. Some people do. There's always something to do, and there's always something to reflect on about, is this timed correctly given the circumstances? And I want to help you figure that out, either in the comments or on the phone. See you on the next video.